Unit 4, Period 4, Section 7 deals with westward growth from the early 1800s up until the Civil War. In this unit, in this period, we're going to talk about uh, land acquisition. And so far in American history, we've talked about the original 13 colonies, shown here on the map in blue, and we've talked about the um, success of the American colonies in their revolution against Great Britain in 1783, and the eventual Treaty of Paris of 1783 gave the Americans all the lands east of the Mississippi River. We talked about the successful purchase of the Louisiana Territory under President Thomas Jefferson's administration. We talked a little bit about the establishment of the 49th parallel up here by treaty with Great Britain, and in which we established the northern boundary of the United States at the 49th parallel. A year later, in 1819, under Secretary of State John Quincy Adams, the United States purchased Florida from Spain for $5 million and established the southern border of the United States. In 1836-37, the United States Americans living in Texas fought a revolution against the Mexican government and won their independence from Mexico. And then in 1845, the United States annexed Texas and made it part of the United States. In 1846, an agreement was made with Great Britain to extend the 49th parallel all the way out to the Pacific Ocean, and we were able to gain the Oregon Territory. And then also in 1846, the United States got into a war with Mexico over a boundary dispute in the southern part of Texas. Eventually, the United States acquired all of Mexico. So that's what this map shows. And that's an explanation of westward growth across the United States. This westward growth or westward expansion is also shown on this map. The blue line is the Lewis and Clark expedition. Purple and green are two of the trails that led westward, and then the red line is the Transcontinental Railroad. All of these allowed settlers to move westward. Now I want to show you a film to introduce westward growth.
Pioneers moved west for a variety of reasons. Some in search of riches, others simply to escape poverty. Some were fleeing the law, others were fleeing oppression. What they all shared was the ability to dream of something different, something better, and the West represented an opportunity for that dream to become a reality.
These are people that packed everything they had into the back of a wagon and went. And they went on faith in themselves, in their God, in their new country. And they just went out knowing that they could do this.
Well, I think they went west for so many different reasons. But certainly among them would be the belief that you were going to not only have this new life, which you were freer, but you were going to change yourself. You were going to be a new person in the new world. And this dream that you were going to be transformed may have been just a dream, but it certainly motivated a lot of people. And every time they moved west, they were moving to the future and into a new time and leaving the old time behind.
It must have taken an enormous amount of courage, although probably some of them felt that they didn't have anything and so there was nothing to lose as they moved west. And it speaks to the human capacity to take risks and to go forward and to build in spite of all sorts of terrors, real and imagined.
Cautiously, I slipped from under the buffalo hide, got up on my knees and peered over the side of the wagon. There was nothing but land, not a country at all, but the material out of which countries are made. I had the feeling that the world was left behind, and we had got over the edge of it, and were outside man's jurisdiction. Willa Cather.
So this idea that we're talking about here is one of manifest destiny. And the idea is that God ordained that the United States would one day stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific. So this drawing, this artwork here shows an angel of the Lord leading the settlers of the United States westward, chasing the Indians out of the way. To the right, you can see what would be the Atlantic Ocean. You can see the Rockies, and you can see the Pacific. As stated earlier in the first map of this section, I talked about the war for Texan independence. Here's a map showing the war for Texan independence and the fight between Mexico and American settlers living in Texas that was eventually won by the Americans living there. They won their independence. Their first president was a man named Sam Houston. And then later in 1845, the United States annexed Texas and made it part of the United States. Most people are familiar with this. This is the actual Alamo in San Antonio, Texas, and this was the scene of a famous battle in American history between Texan forces and Mexican forces, in which all the Texans inside this fort were killed by Mexican soldiers. 10 years later, in 1846, the United States fought a war against Mexico, and this was over the southern boundary of Texas. My mouse is pointing out the Rio Grande River. This is what the United States claimed was its southern border of the United States after annexing Texas. The Mexicans claimed that it was the Nueces River that my mouse is tracing now that was further north. The president at that time, James K. Polk, sent the American Army south of the Nueces River and to camp on the northern side of the Rio Grande. Polk sent General Zachary Taylor to do this. Upon arriving on the northern shore of the Rio Grande River, Zachary Taylor's forces were attacked. This is a more blown up map of the scene. So upon crossing the Nueces River here and settling on the northern side of the Rio Grande, American soldiers were killed in a skirmish, and this leads to a declaration of war by the United States government. And eventually the United States defeats Mexico, even though it's outnumbered, even though it fights most of the war in Mexican territory. The United States eventually gains this pink territory here known as the Mexican Cession, and it is a large acquisition of territory. Almost immediately, the northern or free states attempt to outlaw slavery in all the territories acquired in this Mexican Cession. The vote is blocked in the Senate and the measure fails, but the South understands what the North's ultimate goal is because of this Wilmot Proviso, and that is to outlaw slavery permanently. As fate would have it, now that we've gained this Mexican Cession, in 1848, gold was discovered at a place called Sutter's Mill, California, and tens of thousands of Americans begin to move into these territories. Well, as you know from the Northwest Ordinance, when 60,000 people move into a territory, that territory can apply for statehood. This is going to speed up the controversy over a balance of slave and free states in the Western territories that's going to lead to a couple of compromises in the next unit.